coming from there. So
Yeah.
it's coming. Can you smell it? It's coming from the east over the tanks onto the community. So wind is from east over tanks into community. Sweet smell, a burnt smell. You open this valve up a wee bit. Keep that clear. Okay. Pump. Stop. Okay. What you want to do is make sure. There you got your air sample.
I actually think the penalties for some of these problem areas are too low. You've got to take accountability for it, and you say, hey, we take responsibility for that, and you make sure you do what it takes to make sure it doesn't happen again. So.
But how do you take accountability? But this is it. You come out and say once again, we're really sorry this happened. 1,000 rand emission of guilt fine. So what? Sorry, we'll try again. See, the thing of
1,000 rand admission of guilt fine is a joke.
It's not the only part of the world. I mean, there's a community, I think they're called, it's part of Melbourne, and with very similar environmental conditions.
Sasolburg is much worse than South Durban. The Vaal Triangle is much worse. And I think that's a reality. But, you can't say because there are worse off places, we don't need to take action. The World Health Organization, the United Nations, the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the European Union's Environmental Bureau, and the environmental units all say pollution equals illness. Benzene equals leukemia. It's clear. That equals this. And the question is, in South Durban, we need to get rid of the one so that we don't have the illness. And I think that's important. We don't need to argue about where else it is in the world. It's recognized. And let us make sure that we try and slowly and effectively reduce the pollution so that people are not impacted upon.
Now, you look at the last 4 years compared to the last 30 years, there's a difference, but purely...
Well, the 6 years before that, since the advent of democracy, supposed democracy.
Yes.
What happened in those 6 years?
Well, I think it takes time for government to establish the policy environment. It takes time to get the whole message of polluted environment onto the political agenda.
Nothing has been done, and that's the truth. Enforcement, while in principle there's been movements in principle, industry has not been wrapped over the knuckles. They're still a law unto themselves.
I defy any one of those activists to tell me what country in the world and what city in the world has achieved what we've achieved over the last 2 to 3 years.
If we view the last 2 to 3 years, we can't view that without the context of the many years of struggle of organizations in South Durban to try and get reductions in pollution. But I think we still have a very long way to go.
That where we've reduced exceedances by a huge percentage. Yes, we're not there completely. Now, that is, in spite of the fact that there wasn't legislation yet that clobbered industry for doing that. The fact is that they've actually realized that they've got to do that. It's in their interest.
You know that every now and then there's a disaster. As much as the industry says that they're putting measures, preventative measures in place. But every now and then you have an explosion.
I got a call at 8:30 when the explosion happened, and my cell phone started going off at the same time, and people were calling me. I'm aware of what's going on. There's an explosion at the engine, and only 2.5 hours later, when Hartman came out and said, "Well, everything's fine. We've solved the problem."
Well, I personally went down to the gate and probably spent an hour and a half talking to the community.
We've just extinguished that fire. The all clear has been sounded right now. What's important here is that there are no injuries. There's no cause for concern on the community side. That's what's most important. People obviously would be upset about this. Right now, there's absolutely no reason for the community to be concerned, and I've asked that message actually go out to the community as soon as possible.
The oil refinery has a responsibility, Engine has a responsibility to inform people of every single route that goes off in relation to what it was, what were the consequences of that.
There are no alarms that we sound here that need a response from the community.
And as the city manager, I was in complete control of that situation from the moment it happened to the moment it was resolved. We never got to the stage at which, in my terms, it's defined as an emergency. An emergency is still not something that you evacuate people about. The reason for that was that it gets contained, all of those key points. Any key point in the country is considered to be almost like its own local authority.
They call a national key point site, meaning that the closest residential area or the perimeters should be plus minus 100 to 200 meters. Now, if you look at Wentworth, you got a public school across the road that's 10 meters away.
It's no use having a plan when I don't know about it. Mrs. Jones next door doesn't know about it. Mrs. Ramdani down the road doesn't know about it. Mr. Naidu doesn't know about it. Evacuation plan is only as good as those people who are going to be impacted upon knowing that evacuation plan.
That was a relatively minor incident. They get concerned for their own safety, and there was no reason for that to happen, and that's concerning. Eh?
We need to make an example of one company, and I think other companies will realize how serious we are.
Fire on a pump, and that led to a fire on the tank. It was in a fairly contained portion of the plant. It was pretty well handled. There were no injuries or anything like that.
When injury does happen, no information.
It should be the right of every citizen to know anything that impacts on their lives.
On Saturday morning, there was a fire alarm that went off Saturday morning at 5 o'clock. People don't know that. And one of our members from PETCON was burnt.
No big deal, no. Another one of those ones. There was a guy who got slightly burnt, but again, not a major incident.
That is why we're saying the type of investigation that's going to be undertaken by whom and what results are going to get out there. If we are unable to get, and the only reason I know and we know as an organization is because it's one of our members.
Who says we're not going to do that?
Well,
you've got no basis for saying that. Because if there's something that's deficient in our systems, we're intellectually honest enough to actually say so and do something about it. You're making assumptions about an organization there that are correct.
Last year alone, the maintenance, the people who deal with maintenance on that refinery, retrenchments there were 47 retrenchments that took place. 47. 11 of them were safety watches. In other words, people who are there to ensure that whoever's working in a certain area do so safely. Now, 11 of those safety watches were retrenched. Now, that is a problem.
I don't think it's true to say that we are skimping on the numbers of people that are used to maintain the facility. In fact, I'd say we could be accused of the reverse.
So you see a lot of those incidents are on account of that there is no maintenance getting done.
You must look at the numbers of people that are performing the functions.
Yeah.
That's a problem. Because that gentleman, that worker who's supposed to be checking there is probably off doing something else based on multi-skilling. That's all about the bottom line. So, the less workers you have, obviously, you're going to have the people who are supposed to be monitoring at a particular time, all the time, are not going to be able to because they've got too much on their hands.
Labor in the oil refinery has been downscaled, multitasked to be able to reap bigger profits for the managers.
Effectively, it's a change in philosophy, and we decided those positions are better in-house than outside. And frankly, from Frank's point of view, or from a union organizer point of view, that's a good thing rather than a bad thing.
He protects his refinery. That's his job. That's what he gets paid to do. Now, from our point of view, we must protect our community.
After the strike in 2001, they were blacklisted.
What do I understand by the term blacklisting?
If workers had gone on a strike to strike for more higher salaries or wages, they would be blacklisted?
Yeah, I've heard it used. Frank uses that term.
Blacklisting is absolutely, totally and completely real. It exists on that refinery till this day.
Well, we don't blacklist people.
He says that blacklisting does not exist. We told him to his face that it does. We from the community, we know. And we as an organization, as a union, know.
We don't have a practice of blacklisting, but I'll tell you for free, if there are people who come onto my site and affect safety, I won't have them on my site.
Were actually blacklisted after striking, and it was legitimate issues. And they have gone throughout the country looking for jobs, and they can't. They went up to Cecil. There were a few of them, and they were turned away at the gate because they were blacklisted. So Engine spread that list in the big industry. These poor people can't find jobs anywhere in the country.
They print the list out. There's a list, and on the list, blacklisted. Those are the words.
Benzene levels around this facility are lower than the European standards, so that's not a crisis.
She'd seen a program on TV where some results of air monitoring had taken place outside the Engen refinery, and they picked up high levels of benzene. And this wasn't a state agency that had taken the tests. It was an activist group from the States.
They found one sample, and I frankly can't explain why that number. In fact, it was that incident that said to us, well, we don't have a set of numbers that says that's right or that's wrong. So pretty much since then, it must have been more than 2 years ago now, we've been monitoring on an ongoing basis since then. And you can only counter that argument with numbers, and we've been monitoring since, and the numbers demonstrate that there isn't a benzene problem around the perimeter.
That with benzene levels, they monitored the amount of benzene in the refinery. Therefore, you'll get less outside. But that's rubbish. It comes out of a stack, it blows, the wind blows, and it blows it down onto people's houses. So you can say that your benzene levels in the plant are fine, but that doesn't mean it's fine outside. It's probably worse, and it is worse.
Data to date indicates that there isn't alarming levels of benzene because there have been reductions by industry, and there's been a fuel reformulation program in place in terms of vehicles, so levels are lower compared to some of the European cities.
I picked up a lot of cases all in the same road. I started along the top end of Lighthouse Road and Marine Drive. But it was problematic because a lot of the people who died were old, but they'd all been recently diagnosed. They were all children, so they couldn't have smoked, they couldn't have been exposed at work.
Benzene's a different set of issues. Leukemia.
And then I went to Merebank, and there I found a number of cases where there were, one house in particular, there was a little girl who had leukemia, and right next door to her was a little boy who had a growth on his back.
Well, where did you get the number from?
Dr. Dwayne Blau at the University of Natal's medical school.
Was that Tony Carney's study?
And he'd previously worked at the cancer registry, so he had some experience in calculating what cancer risks and rates were. And so I was quite surprised when he came back, and with quite on the face of it, quite a shocking result. For leukemia, he calculated that the rate in Merebank was about, I think, 24 times higher than the national average.
Then we need to understand, what is causing that, Greg?
Dioxins, furans,
yeah,
things that are emitted in the air, they're known carcinogenics.
Fair enough.
They don't happen anywhere else. And this is where the heavy industry sits. This is where the stuff's being emitted, at whatever levels.
But if you use a bit of diplomacy, engagement, presentation of information...
It's not acceptable. But that message hasn't been sent yet. It's still nice talks, negotiations, cooperation.
From the time she was living in Merebank, she never had any sicknesses. And in her 5 year, she was in sick list. And she was... Karina.
She's still alive.
No, she's still living. She had to go for a bone marrow transplant and stuff like that. And all her hair dropped off.